Now. Thank you. Welcome.
It's, let's just bow our heads as we center ourselves in prayer. Loving God, we give thanks for this program year, for adult education, its ministry, its leaders, the different presenters, and all those who gather in this room and in the library and online. Today on Pentecost in particular, we give thanks for the gift of the Spirit that flows through Pat Stocker, who in her many ministries and busy schedule and her walking journeys, willing to share her many gifts with us this morning. So we ask that that Spirit allows us to be attentive and to connect both near and far this day, on this Pentecost, as we grow closer to you and each other and the world you love. Christ we pray.
Amen. Amen. Well, it really is we're very blessed to have Pat with us on many different levels. She's had a lot going on in her own life, and to share this time with us is very special. Pat is a longtime member of Bradley Hills. She served in service in many capacities. She did chair adult ed.
I did, and I've been on session 3 times. I think that's enough.
Well, and she's also chaired the worship and arts ministry for many years. So Pat, thank you for being with us. Just to give you a little background for her qualifications, you know, every Sunday when we have members that, I mean, we're good friends, but I don't always know, you don't know the depth and the width of these people's expertise and love and commitment and service. And Pat has spent her whole lifetime as an advocate for women in her professional life and in volunteer activities. She's helped corporations, educational organizations broaden the opportunities for women and has been active in a number of organizations for equity for women and rights. She served as president of AAUW Maryland, which she's currently serving, and she's also been co-chair for the state of Maryland and its nominating committee. And she's currently the president of the Bethesda Chevy Chase branch. Might serve together. But Pat also, she founded the Conference Board Women's Leadership Council. The first time this kind of an organization has included a council exclusively for women, top women leaders, from corporations, educational organizations, and nonprofits. She planned and hosted the Conference Board's National Women's Leadership Conference for 2 years and has served on a number of boards, Maryland's Women's Heritage Center boards, Women's Graduate USA, and has been for a while a delegate to the UN Commission on the Status of Women. She served for 11 years as a trustee for Suburban Hospital. Pat was a marketing professor at the Robert H. Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland. She served as associate dean for many years until 1999. She taught at Georgetown, University of Denver, has a PhD. I could go on, but she has been a top consultant to important leaders throughout the country in both business and in nonprofit areas. So, Pat, thank you so much for giving your time this morning and sharing with us.
First, Carol, thank you so much for inviting me. And I have, as she mentioned, I have had a passion for many years for making sure that that women get fair treatment. I was the first woman who had finished my doctoral program at the University of Colorado, and I wasn't the first woman who had tried. There was a particular professor who said, and he happened to be one of the senior professors, said, "I don't believe there's any place for women in this field." So he didn't know who he was dealing with. My parents gave me, one of the great gifts they gave me was self-confidence. And so it did not deter me. And I actually was, during that time, was selected as a top graduate student. And I figured that that sort of proved that he was at least wrong on that. And, but in any case, I have been blessed with a wonderful career. I just as mentioned before we started that I had a very busy career. As she said, I was at universities, but University of Maryland mostly. And then I moved over to Marriott and ran their executive education programs. But my husband likes to say that even though I'm retired, he said, she works as hard as she ever did. She just doesn't make any money. And I think there's some truth to that. But you know, the gift is that you do things about which you are truly, truly passionate. And I'm going to talk about one of those passions today because I have been long involved with issues in the US, but I found myself maybe 4 years or so ago, or 5 years saying, you know, I read about these terrible situations that women find themselves in, whether it's being married off at 10 or 11 years old and, or, you know, being unable to get an education. And so I said, how do I get involved in these issues as well as those in the US? I will tell you one of the things that's happened is I find myself complaining a little less about the US now because I realize nobody's telling me, now they might say, I don't think there's a place for you in this field, but they can't say, no, you can't go to school here. And so, so I do feel that I was drawn to this experience, and the way I came to it was through an organization called Women Graduates International. And that's a group that's headquartered in Switzerland. And then I'm part of the US group, which is it's a US organization related to this. It's Graduate Women USA. And I'm actually secretary of the board, so I'm very involved in that organization. We are allowed through Women Graduates International to have a number of representatives to the Commission on the Status of Women. And maybe, Carol, if we can, I just prepared a few slides to sort of guide us along this journey when I talk to you about what we do, how we do it, and what I think works, and to be honest, what doesn't work. Perhaps I've introduced it by saying it's been one of the most inspiring experiences of my life, and at the same time, it has been one of the most depressing. Inspiring because we have wonderful stories about people whose lives have been changed through the intervention of others, particularly through the intervention of the UN or groups such as ours. And that is inspiring. Depressing because there's only so much we can do. And one of the particular problems we face is the UN is really member countries. So you can work with governments. We don't have easy ways to work with terrorist organizations or rogue governments or during wars. And so even the influence we have is limited in many ways. And so as I say, it's on the one hand, just amazing. And you hear stories, and I'll share some of them today. But on the other hand, there's so much to do. And so I will be talking about some of that today. Now, is this the slide I'm looking at? Register my yeah. Okay. I wonder if you can just flip to the next slide for me, Carol. I most recently attended the 68th session of the Commission on the Status of Women. Why 68? Because this organization, this portion of the UN was founded in 1946. So they counted from then. So this was the 68th session. And as I say, I had the privilege of participating actually for last year as well. And then the previous year was only online. And I will tell you that I found that very unrewarding, because the great joy is being able to talk to people and hear their personal stories. And online, you simply don't have, I mean, you certainly hear the stories, but you don't have the opportunity to interact or to share your concern. If you could flip to the next one. This slide means nothing to you, except I just wanted to show you where we fit. If you look at the left, it said there's a General Assembly up in that left corner. Way over in the middle column, there's a thing that's a Women Graduates. And this is the Commission on the Status of Women is the middle. So we report through that structure. So we will have our meetings. Hello, Kim. We will have our meetings, and we work all year. Even though the meetings are 2 weeks in March, you work all year to prepare for this. You work on proposals. each year as a theme, and I'll get to that in a moment. But you work all year, and then the 2 weeks that we actually meet together, we actually do some presentations in our group ourselves, but we also attend many. And so we learn a lot. And then at the end, we come up with agreed solutions, not solutions, agreed recommendations. Certainly aren't solutions. And at that point, then they start working their way through the system. And if you look at that upper left, the General Assembly, if we're lucky, then some of those get passed by the General Assembly, and we can at least start officially working on those issues. There's always some disagreement about what those are, and disagreement among the member countries. One disagreement we're facing right now actually came up, we just had a board meeting this last week. Every year there is one country that is, I don't know how it's selected. I think it's just a circulation thing. I've never voted on it. But anyway, next year it's Saudi Arabia, and they have a man. So there's a great deal of protest against that, because Saudi Arabia has not been a very significant leader in rights for women. They've made certainly some small progress, but you wouldn't look at them the way you'd look at Norway or some other countries as being leaders. But that's the nature of it. But we do find ourselves protesting. Carol, could you go to the next slide? This is a little bit about the commission itself. As I told you, it was founded in 1946. I was alive in 1946, but not aware of much, but that was what had happened. And this was established with the idea that men and women should have equal rights in political, social, and economic fields. And so it was started with a general philosophy that permeated it. And the different thing about the commission compared to many of the other UN functions is that NGOs, that is non-government organizations, are actually allowed to fully participate. That is not the usual thing. Member countries are always allowed to participate. But in this case, now you do go through quite a process to get approved for this. And we have gone through a significant, so you can't just raise your hand and say, I'm here. You have to work through this structure. However, I find that it's a very, very helpful thing, because we learn from each other. And we do have certainly nonprofit leaders, business leaders, political leaders who are involved even outside of the UN members. So that's how that works. And if you go to the next slide, Carol, this is the NGO participation. And I said very few organizations in the UN have this. So I feel really privileged, because we operate. We can't, for example, walk into a private meeting of, let's say, the Security Council. We don't have those privileges. I should have brought it, but you have a badge that tells you exactly what you can do, and they scan it, so you can go to whatever you're going to. Although I did try to go to lots of things. The best piece of advice I got last year when I came was wear comfortable shoes, because the UN, many of you have been there, and it's a big place and we are all over it. So comfortable shoes, and then bring your own water bottle. That was the other thing. And those are the things that I joked. I said, you make all this preparation on the intellectual side, but sometimes those are the things that really end up making a difference. But in any case, so these are accredited organizations, but this is how I happen to get involved. And if you can go to the next slide, this is the organizations, these are two organizations, but Graduate Women International is the international. We are Women Graduates USA, so we are the US portion of that. As it turns out, as I told you, I'm quite active. I'm actually hosting our national meeting this fall. I'm doing it at the Hyatt because it's about a block and a half from where I live, but they're wonderful to work with. I used to work for Marriott, so I hope none of you will mention to Marriott that we selected the meetings. But nonetheless, it's a wonderful organization. When I describe it, and I did this when I met with the Hyatt, I said, these are the real traditional little old ladies in tennis shoes. I mean, these women, many of them have dedicated much of their lives to doing this work. They are experts. I'm just a learner, but they're just an amazing group of really smart, dedicated, passionate women. And they're they do it until they die. And then luckily, a number of them have left us some money when they die. So we have enough money to do some things. So that's very helpful. One of our, Kathy Horvat, who was actually our major UN representative, passed away this last year. And she turned over her entire IRA to us. So we are able to do a number of things with that money that we thought she would value. And so we do vote on those things. And if you turn to the next one, I call this page proof. This is proof that I was actually there. You see there's you behind me. And there I am sitting at one of the tables in front of a microphone. So I mean, we do participate fully, and that's, I asked somebody to snap a picture just as proof. Okay, so moving on, if you can, Carol. Each year we have a theme for this, and we're told this, we don't get to decide this. This is given to us by the people who are actually the people who actually are at the very top who run this, who work for the UN. But our theme this year was on addressing poverty, and this particularly related to women are in more poverty, and the statistics are pretty overwhelming on this, but women certainly experience more poverty than men throughout the world. And one of the issues that relates to that is our financial institutions and how accessible they are to women. So we had many, many sessions that related. Now, it's funny how we are quite good at our organization. I'm sure others are, of taking an issue you really care a lot about, fitting it into this one, because you know what you want to talk about, but you figure out how it also relates to poverty. So anyway, this was to accelerate the achievement of gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls by addressing poverty and then strengthening the institutions and financing with a gender perspective. So we want to make sure that we are giving women access. Again, the next slide, Carol, just goes particularly into some of the reasons we are, but over 100 million women and girls could be lifted out of poverty if we made some very possible changes. We could create 300 million jobs. If we educated women, we could, there are many issues that would be much better in the world if we were able to do this. And it would be better, by the way, for men and women. And there are men, and most of the representatives there, I would have to say, are women, but there are many men who are strongly advocates. And indeed, if you go to the next slide, the Secretary General of the UN, and I cannot pronounce his name, is it Antonio Guterres, I think, something like that. He did the opening session for us. And he specifically talked about, and I just grabbed a few, it was a very long speech. I grabbed just a few pieces of that for this slide, but he calls this a preeminent global body dedicated to promoting the rights of women and girls. And then he says something which really hit me. Our world is going through turbulent times, and women and girls are being hit hard. In conflict zones around the world, women and girls are suffering most from the wars waged by men. That's probably a slight overstatement, because I think some women are waging those wars too. However, I myself have been very, very troubled as I look at the Middle East, as I look at Africa, as I look at various areas of conflict in the world, that women, if you'll forgive me for being crass, but I would say that this is the first time I've heard of rape being used as a weapon of war. It's very, very troubling to me that it's actually a strategy, an understood strategy of war. So I feel that I need to let my voice be heard. There's all the stuff you care about. You say, well, where can I make a little difference on this? And so I have made my choice, but we each make our choices. We can do this different ways. The Presbyterian Church is one way, of course. The church itself is involved in many of these. So before I move on, so we have a theme each year. This last year, as I say, the theme was on poverty. The previous year, it had been on climate change and its particular effect on women. So we dealt with issues of immigration, of economic stability when you lose the ability to grow the crops or to live the lives you've lived. So there were many implications of that. But every 5 years, we have a different theme, and it's the same every 5 years. but it grows out of a particularly very important meeting. Many people believe it was the most important meeting that about women that has been held perhaps in recent times. And it's the Beijing meeting, which occurred in 1995. And I wonder if I can ask you to go to the next slide, Carol. The Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. This was an extremely important meeting. Hillary Clinton was one of the speakers, as she was first lady at the time. But many others involved in this. And it is on this basis that they set an agenda for 2030. And so every 5 years, we go back and say, how are we doing on this? So next year, it will be 2025 is one of those years. So we'll look back on those 5 years since we last did this and say, what progress has been made? Where have we lost ground? In the US, I think right now we're losing some ground. So I do believe that you would like to think that it's all forward movement. But as we all know, in some parts of the world, we make 2 steps forward, and I always like to say 1 step backwards, but sometimes it's 3 steps backwards. So anyway, the Beijing Declaration was adopted at the 1995, and it's called the Fourth World Conference. There have been other world conferences on women, but I think it is generally agreed this was the meaningful one. There have been other opportunities. And so this is a one, and as I say, we do a 5-year review process about this. And if you'll turn to the next slide, First Lady Hillary Clinton, as I mentioned, was one of the speakers. And I picked out just a few quotes from her speech, but it was a very important meeting, partly because she herself was able to bring international attention and interest and publicity to this. But she talks about human rights are women's rights, and women's rights are human rights. In other words, it's not a men's and women's issue so much as a human issue. And she says, let us not forget that among those rights are the right to speak freely and the right to be heard. And finally, she says, women must enjoy the right to participate fully in the social and political lives of the countries if we want freedom and democracy to thrive and endure. I should tell you that when I was doing some research on this, this was listed as her speech at this meeting was listed as one of the 100 most important speeches of the 20th century. She really did her job of crystallizing those issues which are important to women all over the world. And her own, you know, of course, that her own interests, some people love her, some people hate her, but I don't think anyone questions her dedication to equal rights, to democracy, to having people have opportunities, women and girls particularly. The next page is proof. Again, here's proof that there's Hillary Clinton addressing the conference. And I just said, I decided to include that so you could see, you know, there's lots of talk about Hillary's hair. This was one of her long hair periods. But in any case, she herself, I think we should give her a lot of credit for the progress that was made. Certainly not for long. I mean, there were wonderful people from all over the world, but from our country, I have to say. And if you can go to the next one. So I'd like to spend some time on this Beijing Declaration because it really sets the tone for what we're going to work on, what we care about. And some of the issues evolve. For example, climate change has evolved. There are issues that aren't the same, or we at least don't look at them the same as we did in 1995. But it was very important because they came up with, and I will share on the later next slide, what the issues were. But the good news is 189 countries all agreed on these issues, and they all made a commitment to work on these issues. As you probably would suspect, some are much more committed to, some countries are much more committed to this than others. Some pay lip service, some are all in. And I would say the US is not the top of that list. I would say other countries in many cases are doing a better job when you look at women's health care, for example. Women's health care, you know, I just was at a session yesterday, Patty, you were at the same one, where we talked about women's health care. And our speaker said, so do you think we're at the top in the country? Well, we're the most expensive. Let's start with that. We are most expensive. Are we best, particularly in women's healthcare? The answer is not by a long shot. And without getting political, I'll just say it's partly because we don't have universal health care. But nonetheless, the point is, we are not doing the best on this. But anyway, 189 countries came into this and they said, we're going to take 12 areas that we think are important, and we're going to really focus on those. And if I can ask you to go to the next slide, Carol, here are those 12 areas, and each one of them has a whole treatise. And I mean, there's like a book on each of these. I'm just going to tell you, these are the 12 critical areas that they determined were what they would like. I shouldn't say determined, they agreed that it's what they would like. And as I say, we monitor these regularly, but every 5 years, we specifically go back and say, okay, how are we doing on human rights for women or women in the media? How are we doing on this? And the answer is maybe not as well as we'd like. Now, I had some of my experience, I told you some of these experiences I had were very positive and some were negative. I wanted to describe a couple of sessions. The session actually in which that picture was taken of me earlier, that proof picture to say, yes, I was there, was a particular meeting that was sponsored actually by Norway, but it was on the Western African countries, but Western African countries. And they specifically, Norway pulled this together because one of the things they do is sponsor, they take a lot of money and they put it into these countries. And specifically, they talked about a program they have to provide high school education for women in these countries. Now, you wouldn't think it's a big issue, but in these particular countries, when a girl is about 10 or 11, she gets married off to somebody who's usually maybe in his 30s. Within a year or two, probably as soon as medically possible, she has a baby and the rest of her life is pretty much determined at that point. So the philosophy here is twofold. We provide a high school education. We provide at that same point a stipend to the family, because one of the reasons that women, that this is the culture, is that the families can't support that person and they need financial help. So you provide a stipend to the family so that they can allow the daughter to go to school. And if you forgive me for using bad language, it's the language that one of the speakers used. She said that they keep these girls in through high school. And she said, I don't care if they learn a damn thing. They're going to go through the whole high school program. And her point is what they're doing is they're keeping them from this cycle of very young marriage, child marriage. And so at least at that point, they're 16 or 17. So they may or may not have an education that is usable, but we hope they do. But even if they don't, is the point of this, the woman who said this, and that was a woman from Norway actually, that said, even if they don't, they have now been old, they're old enough that they could be involved at least in some of their own decisions. So that's the kind of thing where you see the dichotomy between what is possible and then what is reality for many people. Our own organization does several things that are part of this. We take some of our very modest resources, but we do several things that I can use as examples. One of the things we do is we have a Rescue Scholars Program. Partly this is graduate women, so the emphasis of this organization is on education as one. We certainly have other goals, but one of them is education. And if a woman, for example, is a professor in Iran and suddenly she's not able to teach, we have a Rescue Scholars Program, which actually pays her to come to the US. We pay for that transition, and then we partner with the university. We pay half and they pay half of the salary. And then we do that for 2 years. And then at that point, either that university hires her or she has the time during that time in which to search for another academic position in the US. One that we have now, and we're doing this convention in the fall, the one that's at the Hyatt, remember, anyway, Our this year's scholar is coming. She's a lawyer. She's on the law faculty at Yale right now. And she is an example of this. So she comes and then we help, and they're always trying to get us to help their families as well. So we somehow get involved in that too. But we have done this. Now we only can do a few of these. So these are little examples that affect, certainly they're important, but they don't change the culture. But what we do is we show what's possible. And for example, another thing we did, we have several programs that address some of these issues. One thing we also did was there was a community we decided to focus on in Africa where women had no medical care during pregnancies. Particularly, remember, a lot of these are very young women also pregnant. And they had no medical care before the pregnancy, in the childbirth, or postnatal, okay? So we invested in providing that for this community. The statistics were staggering in the success of this program, both in infant mortality, in the health of the mothers, in the health of the babies after they're born. And what we do is we use these as little microcosms, hoping that then others, this will grow. It's kind of like the idea when you can see the possibilities that others will do things. So I think it was Mother Teresa said, I might not be able to do big things, but I can do small things in a big way. Well, this is a small thing we can do in a big way. So we do those kinds of things. We have a program we call mini grants. And these are small grants. They might even be $10,000. I mean, these aren't millions of dollars. This is not a Ford Foundation kind of thing. This is a bunch of little old ladies in tennis shoes. But but these mini grants get used by organizations to help women, for example, develop skills that can allow them to earn income. So if it's being able to do something in their local economy, maybe it's to learn to do beading that could be for sale, or what it's something that then they can change their community. Now, we do not do the microfinancing, but there are a number of groups that do. And that's the same kind of thing, where if you invest a relatively small amount of money, you can make a big difference. And I was almost brought to tears last year at our annual meeting. They did a video of some of these, and the people talked about what had happened. And it would bring you to tears to say, how it changed people's lives. So these are the kinds of things that organizations involved in the UN Commission on the Status of Women can do, and actually do to try to make a difference in their own way. And so I don't want to make it sound too positive, because I think it's a challenge. You do it, or you do it for here, and why aren't you doing it here? Or you do it for her, and why aren't you doing it for her? And so in our particular small grants, people apply for them. So they make application, and then we have a committee that reviews them and decides what they're going to accept. And they take it very seriously. As I told you, these are the proverbial little old ladies in tennis shoes. I mean, well, I told you that it's like a full-time job for me being a volunteer. Well, many of these women, this is what they do 24/7 all the time. And for me, it's one of a number of things that I do that are important to me, but I'm so proud to be a part and to work with women who share these values. So this is, I guess because I really want to open up an opportunity for many of you who I know probably know the UN. Some of you, I know the Peace Corps, other things that are so related to this. When I'm running this meeting, by the way, in the fall, I'm looking at Steve Fox as I say this. One of the speakers I have invited to our meeting to speak to us is Jody Olson, the former director of the Peace Corps, who has a book coming out this fall called A Million Miles, my history with the Peace Corps, my work in I don't remember, my something in the Peace Corps. In any case, Jody will be speaking to this group because there are other ways we work to try to make a difference in the world. One difference between the Peace Corps and those of us in this group is the Peace Corps, and Steve, I'm sure you're well aware of this. My daughter was in the Peace Corps in Armenia. And one of the specific things in the Peace Corps is you are not supposed to try to make a change in the culture. If there's something you don't like in the culture, you have to share, you can share what the US does, but you can't say what you're doing is wrong. And this is very difficult. My own daughter's Peace Corps experience in Armenia was one of the issues that she faced with a woman she knew was that if a woman is kidnapped or taken away in some way and held overnight, she either has to marry that person or cannot marry anybody else because she has spent a night. We don't know what happened in that night. That happened to a woman that she knew. And in some cases, it might be welcomed, but in most cases, I'd say not. And it's certainly not the way you'd want to make that decision. It's not what any of us would. However, by the nature of the Peace Corps role, she could talk about what we do in the US, but she can't say you're wrong. She can't lobby to do this. Now, there's a good reason for that. The Peace Corps is not a political organization, and they've been accused of this. I'm looking at Steve again. As long as the Peace Corps has been around, it's been, they're CIA operatives, they're all these things. That's not true, but the point is they are so careful to make sure that they are not seen as trying to take our culture and then slam it down someone else's proverbial throat. There was another example that's more humorous. Women are not supposed to get together and exercise and stuff. That's not feminine. But some of these women wanted to do that. And so Meg had some videotapes of exercise routines. And so she lived with a family. And so she was able to use the living room. And so these women would come over and they close all the shades in the room. And then she put in this video and they would do their workouts. And my daughter's really into fitness and working out. And then these women would go home, and if their husband's family said, well, what did you do, David? Said, well, we were with Meg. And what did you do? They said, well, we watched a video. Now, that was true. That was true. They did. So she was able to find her own little ways of supporting women who had ideas of how they wanted to kind of push against some of those cultural norms. But again, CSW is sort of the opposite of that in the sense that we're out there advocating, saying, yes, women should be able to get an education. And yes, women should not be mutilated. We would say rape should not be a weapon of war. We can say these things and we can say them by asserting that that is not the right way to go about it. There are other ways. And of course, the challenge is that there are some countries who are very receptive. I look at Norway, which is, I went to a bunch of sessions, obviously, but you look at some of these countries that are so wonderfully proactive, both by their own example, but also by their reaching out to others with the learnings of their experience. So we have opportunities here, and this is one mechanism. It's not the only one, but I actually have decided for me, this is a way to do it, to try to make a difference. So I want to just, if you go to the last slide here, I was going to talk about next year's meeting. And then I would like to get your thoughts, or those of us. Carol, do people post in the chats if we have?
Yeah,
we can
I've
chat.
got
Okay.
one comment in the chat.
Let me finish this then, and then we'll move into that, because I really do want your thoughts on this and what you think is good and what you think is challenging, or if you have questions. The other thing I better say is I am not an important person in this structure. I'm a little cog. I'm a very interested cog, and I do everything I can, but nobody's coming up to me with a microphone saying for CBS News now, what do you think about this issue? they are doing that with some people who are here in the organization. We're sort of the working people here. So, and I'm one of those worker bees. I often say that's my role on boards. I serve on a lot of boards I have over the years. And I always call my role the worker bee. I don't have millions of dollars to spread around, so I can't be one of those. I was just with a dear friend of mine, actually some of you know my brother's been ill and he died this last Sunday morning, which is unfortunate, but also expected. It was very sad, but expected. But anyway, one of his two closest friends just gave $75 million to North Dakota State University, which is what I attended with him and with my brother. He was my brother's closest friend. I said, I can't make the impact that Bob Challey can make on this. I can't do that. But what I can do is I can make a difference other ways. Or what I've gotten to be very good at is influencing, I'm going to call them the Bob Challeys of the world, to do these things. And I've gotten very good at that. So you find, I say I probably have more super wealthy friends than most people you know. People who are billionaires or lots and lots of millionaires. But I don't want to, I certainly don't want you to think in this presentation that I'm up there making these grand decisions. I'm learning with my group. We are making proposals and we work on them all year. And then we work with other organizations. One of the ways you work with these is you find alliances with other groups and you kind of get together so that your voice can be a bigger voice. And that's how we work. So but I don't want to leave you with any impression that this is something where I'm the person who runs this. I do that some places. They aren't big places like this. AAW, Bethesda, Chevy Chase, wouldn't you say, Patty? Well, we do that. And Carol and I do that. Carol is head of our shop. So we work on these things. But nonetheless, I want to make sure you aren't left with that impression. Well, the last slide I want to share with you is CSW 69. Remember, Commission on the Status of Women, and 69 is the number of years since we started, but it's Beijing plus 30 is what they're calling it. And that is the theme. So remember, every 5 years. So we'll be going through and reviewing all those declarations that were made then and say, what have we done on that? Now, what comes out of this? You say, well, what does all this lead to? Well, first, a lot of reports. And I'll tell you, I can't tell you how many reports I proofed just from our organization, which go then into the bigger, they all feed into. So one of the things we do is we simply, well, actually the Commission on the Status of Women was started just to gather data. They said, we don't know how women are being treated around the world. We don't know what percentage they make. We didn't have data on any of this. So that's how it started. We're going to move way beyond that now, but that's what's the first thing, just to say, is there an issue? Well, yeah, there's an issue. We kind of knew there was an issue, of course, but we had to be able to make the case that it was. Now, of course, we've gone beyond that. So we do this. Then we will make proposals, and many others will, and then some of them get accepted to go farther. But there is a process it goes through until a very few will make it to the General Assembly. Remember that slide up in the left corner? The General Assembly is the one who then would pass and say, okay, this is now the UN policy on this issue, that education should be provided for girls at the same level as is for and you would think that would not be controversial, but much of it is. Some of the very same issues we face in this country. One of the big issues, and if I could look at the list, anyway, it's women's control over their own bodies. One of that is their right to determine whether they can't be forced to have an abortion, but they should have access. So the point is, both sides of that are abused in the world. The other thing is, what we find is that boy babies are so much more appealing to families than girl babies. We find genocide taking place. In these countries, there are about 10% more boys than girls. Now, I'm assuming that boys and girls get born at about the same rate, but somehow after they're born, and when you start counting, there are 10% more boys. Well, that's because people go through a lot of effort to get boys, because boys can help the economic support of the family, and they will carry out. So my point is, these are things that sort of get hidden, but we're getting statistics on them. So anyway, so we take these and we work them through. And one of the reasons I mentioned earlier that it's controversial that Saudi Arabia somehow was, I don't know if selected is the right word, their time came up to, because it's a very powerful role. The person who's like president of this and one, I mean, they attend the meeting and they make all kinds of statements and press releases and things. And we're very nervous about this because their country simply does not support many of the values that are very important to the Commission on the Status of Women. So much so that there's been a protest that they ought to not be allowed to do this. Our organization has chosen not to take that stand, partly because we don't believe it would be effective and we want to put our efforts into things that are. But the other thing is we're going to operate below that level. You know, we don't really operate at that level. It's I hope it's somebody important.
Spam.
Oh, I was gonna say, I thought the UN was saying, no, she was wrong on that issue. 1940s. But in any case, but that's one of the things, in other words, next year, we're gonna start looking at some of these issues. And we also look at issues in the US, I have to say, because the US is one of these countries. It's just that organizations like AAUW, that some of us are involved in, this is our focus. Here, it's one thing, but we're only as one of those countries. And as I said, 179 countries passed this Beijing list of important things. And this was a tome of what we're going to do on these. So it wasn't just, these are our values. It was very specific goals. And many countries, as I say, are more committed, more able. Their structures allow whatever we're going to say. And some of us worry in our own country. We didn't think we had to worry about some of these things. And I don't want to get too political, except to say that our own Supreme Court, I think, is questioning some of those things that we think of as basic values. So I do believe that we have issues that we need to face in this country, I've had the opportunity through organizations to get involved in some of these. I got to know a woman named Lilly Ledbetter. Lilly is important. You know who Lilly Ledbetter is. Lilly is important because she brought the suit that turned out to be turned into the Lilly Ledbetter Law. Was the first piece of legislation signed by Barack Obama. And that was to say, she found out after working a long time that her salary was not just a little lower, it was a lot lower than people doing her same job, but she was not allowed access to know what other people earned. And that still is true, by the way, in many cases. However, it didn't guarantee equal pay. A lot of people thought that that's what it did. It did not. It did allow, however, for information. Now we have to keep working for equal pay for equal work. And that's something we're all working on. However, I heard that speech this week, the football player, about how, I don't know how many of you heard this, but he said to these women graduates, so they had been spending at least 4 years, and if they're graduate students, longer. And he said, your real job is to find a good husband and get married and have lots of children. That's your job. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And he is on the Kansas City Chiefs. He's the kicker for the Kansas City. My point only is in this country, we're hearing these things. That's my point.
Yeah.
So that it's not, this isn't, the problem might be bigger elsewhere, because I have to say the protests that came in on that were pretty overwhelming. Matter of fact, there's a petition of the NFL, he should be kicked off the team. I don't think that's probably appropriate. I'm sure he's good. And Kansas City obviously is a really good team. They probably need him. But his own teammates are appalled.
Yeah.
Maybe one of them who's dating somebody named Swift, who is a feminist. But so anyway, so just getting to next year, I haven't decided if I'm going to go next year. It's interesting because you have to apply. It was a rigorous application process the first year. But once you go I found out you kind of get grandfathered. Yeah. So it's really handy. When I did that, I thought, oh my God, I have to do this every year. No, you don't have to do this every year. Once you're there, they let you continue to come. So the rigorous application is not an every year thing. So I would be able to go next year. And my question, the other thing is, obviously you don't get paid for this, but not only, and the UN doesn't charge anything for all of the things that they do. However, we are expected to pay our own, our hotel, our own transportation, those things. So it is not an inexpensive thing to do. And as some of you know, I have a little disability with walking, so I stay at the hotel that's literally the Millennium, if you know New York, right across the street from the UN. So you can walk over. Well, it's a couple $1,000s when I'm there for that long, because it's 2 weeks. So it's so it is not necessarily, it's something you want to do. And it's something that I'm pleased, even though I'm not wealthy, it's something I can afford to do. But it does come with costs. However, you don't pay for any of the meetings or that kind of stuff. And that obviously is handy. And we actually in our group also subsidize some people to do this, particularly young people. We think that we need more young voices, so we're willing to pay travel grants, for example, for younger women who qualify to come, but it's an expense, it's a lot for them. So we will do that kind of thing. So but the UN doesn't do that, is my point. I'm sure the member countries, of course, are paid, their expenses are paid by their countries, but those of us with NGOs are responsible either through our organization or individually for this.
We thank you. We're getting a little close on time. We have some people that.
Okay. Do you have some questions, Carol?
Yeah.
Okay, come in. Let's do that, and then we'll get to anything here.
Diane Whitaker, are you still with us? Yeah.
Yes, I am. I have
Okay.
a question.
Yes.
What sort of a comment? I work with somebody on one of my advisory committees who was forced into child marriage when she was like 16 years of age. She is working on lobbying different states, but especially Maryland, to raise the legal age of marriage, no exceptions to 18. There are cultural groups that have come to the United States. They bring their values with them. And it's not just the United States. They're bringing them to Europe. They're bringing them to other countries. They're bringing things like genital mutilation and early marriage with them. And so the developed nation, well, I shouldn't say developed, the Western and Northern nations that are attractive places for folks to come to are finding that they're going to have to pass laws and enforce them to make sure that some of these cultural practices don't continue. But how, I know that as a lobbying group, as a advocacy group, this is something that you all would probably be involved in to some degree.
We're very involved in these. You said two important things, or you said pass the laws and enforce them. Many countries, when I'm even talking about child marriage, many of those countries have actually passed laws against this, and they're just ignored. And so you said pass and enforce. I think those are two pieces of this. Pass is one, and that's important. I don't mean it isn't. But the second thing is enforcing, and that's much more difficult. And you're right. In this country, we are seeing immigrants from various parts of the world where their customs are different, and they would say it that way. We would say that it's wrong. The way I described that situation in Armenia, for example, we'd say, no, that's wrong. But they would say, no, it's a different custom. But either way you want to talk about it. So I think you're exactly right. And many of us are working on this. And it's actually, to some degree, it's a problem in the US already, but it's a particular problem when you have immigration from countries where this is the accepted norm. And we find the young people themselves are pushing back against this because now they see other models. They see a different model than they had. This is particularly true with arranged marriages. We say, I'm sorry, I'm not doing that. But however, many, even very professional people, are still in that particular piece. And I have to be honest, sometimes I think maybe an arranged marriage would have been better for some people than the one they chose. But nonetheless, I would not be the one arranging it, perhaps. But the point, but thank you first. You made a really good point. And so it's passing legislation, and Maryland is one of those places. We're very involved in AEW at the state level with some of that, and then also with the with the immigrants, but also people from the US going in, being used in, as in sexual situations which they had not chosen and which they are forced in some ways to participate. We are working hard on some of those issues, but you pass the laws, and we're very good at passing laws here in this country. We're just not also very good at this enforcing. Thank you. Carol, is there another question?
Well, Allison, I know in what is great.
Oh, Allison, help us. Oh,
Sorry.
Oh,
I
no.
was listening on the phone and getting.
oh, no. Allison is a kindred spirit. She was also a speaker at one of our AEW meetings this year on the Equal Rights Amendment. Go ahead, Allison. Sorry.
I appreciate, and I can't wait to listen to your full presentation, but I just wanted to make the link, especially on the issue of FGM.
Yeah.
And some may remember, I mentioned this a few weeks ago, that there was an FGM act at the federal level in this country that was struck down because the court found that Congress didn't have the constitutional authority to legislate nationally on the issue of FGM. Now, there's a new law in the books, but it shows the limitations Congress faces now because women don't have equal rights under the Constitution. And that's a barrier to legislating on, I think, all of these issues.
And it's also a very strong argument to get that ERA, which has been passed, to get it actually integrated into our life and accepted into the into our values. And so far, we've gotten, as far as I'm concerned, we've taken all the steps. We accept the very last one, which I would wish that Biden, but that's another issue. Nonetheless, her point is well taken, that national issues, we can pass things, and sometimes we're told, no, you really can't do that. You have to at the state level. And we're very involved in states, but that's a lot harder. And it also is a result of women not having equal voice. So you have a question here?
Yes.
I guess this is a big political year around the world.
Yes.
Big sport year around the world.
Yes.
I would like to ask about a sensitive topic of transgender inclusion.
Oh, yes.
in sports.
Yep.
I mean, it also has affected places like Scotland and the US in terms of electorally.
Yes.
So was there any discussion?
I did not participate in any such discussions at the UN. No. However, our particular group is very supportive of transgender rights. And so our group has taken affirmative action on this topic. But I think you made a very, very important point when you started. There are elections all over the world taking place now, and many of these issues are going to be either directly or indirectly on the ballot. In our country, we have both. We have some directly on the ballot, but depending on which president who we choose for president, we're indirectly making choices as well. So I do think that we're not the only country, and we're seeing this in, I'm looking, the UK, we see this all over the world. So you're right. So do vote wherever you are in the world. But second, and in terms of transgender, yes, I personally am very supportive of transgender rights. And I think that my daughter, who many of you, or maybe you don't know, but she's gay, she's married to another woman, they have 2 children, but she has been very active in this issue as well with the corporations in which she works and has been a national advocate. So I'm personally, this is again where you do something, this is the issue, you say, where can I do something? Well, she has made that choice. We in AEW have made that choice. We in Graduate Women USA have made that choice. So yes, your point is very well taken, and we all need to take a stance on this. Yes, do you have another one?
I would just like to say that, this has been a fabulous discussion, and we really appreciate the work that you're doing and the work that other folks in our congregation are doing.
We are, Allison.
Yeah, we have Allison, but Women's Microfinance International has the best data, and I'll be writing you to make sure that you've got that.
I will do.
Their work is unbelievable. Bonnie Holken, I know, has been working Eastern Whitney. We've got a project that we need to kind of get off the ground in that same area in East Africa, I'm still worried about that. We've got to
Yeah.
keep going with that.
Well,
But there may be connections that we can
but
make.
that's a good
And-
point. We could use our own community. I
Oh, we
always call
can.
this my second family. This is my spiritual family. And we as a family can do things
Well,
together.
we begin
Yeah.
to recognize and know this about each other, but we don't always, and a lot of these projects have not gotten the level of support that,
Yep.
I think would help the
Yeah.
rest of the world, but we can't really thank you enough.
Oh,
And I want to thank everybody that's with us here. This is our last program until September 8th, but we've had a great year.
Yeah.
And we have a really wonderful group of people who are working. We're hoping maybe expand that some. Diane is not going to be able to be my co-chair this coming year, so if anybody would like, well, Gina has, it's really a triumvirate.
Yeah,
because
triumvirate.
Gina's been our partner just as well, and Anthony, but Anthony's not going to be with us next year. So we always need more technical help and support, and so we
Yeah.
welcome, and all of your support and ideas.
yeah.
Just because you might not want to be able to make our meetings, please contact us.
Yeah.
Because you guys have given us wonderful speakers, and next year, frankly, I think we need each other. It's
Yeah.
going to be a challenging
Oh,
year,
Yes.
whatever.
Yes.
And so let's stick together. Promise we'll keep the communication going over the summer, and look forward to meeting formally September 8th. Bruce Douglas will be with us. So
Yes.
thank.
Well,
and
I want
Pat,
to thank all of you first too. I say I have two families, and this Badley Hills is a family that I, even through my own personal crisis that I've been going through, but also just in my personal life, I know that we're there for each other. And I do honor every one of you, and I'm glad to share my story, but I love hearing your stories as well. So thank you very much for this opportunity, Carol, and thank you so much for taking time to participate. And if anyone, I actually am also supposed to be working on the coffee hour, so I'm gonna. The reason you got my cookies today is I had to make cookies for coffee hour, so I said, I'll make a few extra. So please take cookies before you leave. They're lemon. Okay. Thank you.
For those who may not be aware of it, Louise Meyer is leading a postcard campaign
Oh.
to reclaim our vote. The same
Good.
that we've worked with in the
I've
past.
done both.
This is for the Virginia primary.
Good.
It's another way where you can do big things on a small scale.
Yeah.
It's targeted at minority areas. I think the area specifically that she's been given is Henrico County, which was a
Oh,
suburb.
good.
Okay.
And
Thank you
if you
so
can
much.
spare a few minutes, write some post